2025 will go down in the movie history books because this year there's a new award to give out, which is of course best performance by one actor playing multiple characters in the same movie. However, obviously this isn't the first time we've seen one actor playing two characters, with the first going as far back as 1917 with a movie called Lankadan. But this year's one of the most noticeable, with 12 blockbuster movies with this effect releasing this year. Because when they mention KSI or PewDiePie, one of those other twits in the same breath as me, I feel the tide of vomit burn the back of my throat. Because at least KSI uploads. He's not some dopey Venusian catapulted onto this platform just to have YouTube forget about him. Because his strength illuminates just how weak we all really are. So my envy is a calling. It is the sole hope for YouTube, for it is what has driven me to make you subscribe. 1A! 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 2025 is coming to a close. Okay, wait a second, because that intro might be slightly dated.
I've abandoned my child!
And we're here to tell you about something that took years of research.
The Cut God.
So today we're gathered here to celebrate the 98th annual Oscars and give out this award for best performance by one actor playing multiple characters in the same movie. And for this award we have 12 nominees, so let's rank them. Now each movie on this list is going to be ranked on 3 different criteria, and to help me explain them, I'm going to use my honourable mention, a movie that missed out on just 10 days, being Sonic 3.
We're two characters in a movie being played by the same actor.
Now first up we have the movie quality, which is pretty self-explanatory, and it's just how good the movie actually is, completely disregarding the whole aspect of two characters. Next up is interaction, which highlights how well the two characters interact with themselves and act alongside each other. And finally the reason, why did they choose to use one actor opposed to multiple, and does this have a thematical or narrative reason, or maybe even another? Now each of the 3 criteria are going to be rated out of 5, and unironically I would give Sonic 3 a 13 out of 15 because it does all of these so well. So that is the score to beat, and we're going to be kicking this off the way we're also going to end the year with an Osgood Perkins movie. The Monkey is the first release of this year, releasing February 21st, based on a Stephen King novel, where Theo James is the actor who plays 2 characters in this one movie. The film itself is a ridiculous horror comedy and can be a lot of fun if you don't take it too seriously, and the first time I watched it I really loved it, but upon rewatch I found a lot of different plot holes. There is a lot of fun deaths and gore, but it does slightly undermine a lot of the emotional value. And I'm really not a fan of the stupid cryptic ending, so in terms of movie quality, I will give this a 2 out of 5. And it doesn't get much better with its interaction, because the only time they actually interact is with the younger versions of Theo James. Because I'm not kidding, there's only one shot with 2 Theo Jameses in this entire movie. However, when the character is introduced, there is a younger version that does interact. And yes, this may look impressive, but it's not. With a very still camera and no specific time-based actions, it's quite easy to recreate. So maybe if most of the interaction in this film wasn't just shot, reverse shot, it would be higher. But because of that, I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 5 for interaction. But don't worry, the quality does go up with its reason, with them obviously being twins, and their differences come from their different paths of life. However, this isn't subtle at all, and I think they go way too far into it, that they just make Billy a very annoying, psychotic kid. And they definitely could have been different actors, and it really wouldn't have changed much. So we're gonna cap this rating off with a 3 out of 5 for reason, which is 7 out of 15 in total, putting it at the #1 spot because it's the only film so far. Now the year kept moving into March, where we actually had 3 movies that released, the first of which being Mickey 17 on the 7th. Mickey 17, directed by Bong Joon-ho, features Robert Pattinson playing the multiple different Mickeys. And I think this is a very important political movie, especially in the current climate, with Mark Ruffalo's character basically playing a mix between a specific Austrian dictator and Trump. And I really like this story. I think it's very captivating and tells its messaging really well. I also do think a lot of the quality of this film comes from the interactions of the different Mickeys, so I'm going to give this film a 4 out of 5 for the film quality. It keeps this consistency with interaction because there's a lot of different scenes where Mickey actually touches himself. Not like that. But there's some really good times where they actually physically interact, like them fighting each other, having slaps and punches, but that is at a slightly long shot, as well as having moments where they have their arms around each other. But I think my favourite is when Nasha sees both Mickey 17 and 18 together for the first time. The reason I think it's so good is because there's a lot of movement in this shot, but also we switch between who's the body double and who's the actual Mickey. This shot is so well done and slightly complicated that that's why I'm giving it a 4 out of 5 rating for interaction. Now the reason itself is pretty basic, but it's very necessary for the narrative. The multiple Mickeys are clones of each other. They need to be the same actor. It's also a great metaphor showing how little life actually matters and how replaceable Mickey is and how replaceable we are to companies. And the only reason I am knocking this down is because of the whole cloning effect. Surely they should be the exact same, but each Mickey has a very different personality. Therefore, I'm giving this one a 3 out of 5 for reason, which means overall it now has 11 out of 15, bumping it to the #1 spot. Now, as I said, multiple movies released in March, and sadly this one goes down in quality with the Alto Knight. Now, I was probably least looking forward to this one because I hadn't heard very good things about it, and yeah, it was exactly what I was expecting. Now, the film is directed by Barry Levinson, featuring Robert De Niro playing two friends. The film starts with one of the worst edited sequences I've probably ever seen, and ends up being a very generic gangster movie, and my god, it's so dull. The only interesting stylistic point I actually just hate, which is this mockumentary style talking head clips, and it's really jarring. So for that reason, I'm giving this movie a 2 out of 5 for its movie quality. And I wish I could say the interaction saves this film, but it really doesn't, because they don't interact for half of the movie, and the only time they do interact, they're sitting opposite each other on a table and they don't touch once. I don't really even see the point in having two Robert De Niros, because they've refused to speak to each other for most of this movie. And because of that, the interaction is 2 out of 5, because it's kind of just pointless. And if you thought it couldn't get any worse, obviously it does. The reason is pathetic. First of all, they're not even brothers or twins or anything like that. They're simply just friends. And watching this movie, I couldn't even find any like weird metaphorical reason or anything. It's just they're friends. That's the entire reason. And even the producers said their reason was because De Niro kind of just wanted to. So because of that, I'm giving this film a 1. And if I could, I would give it a 0, but there was a choice behind it, so it has to get a 1. Which means overall, the film gets 5 out of 15, hitting rock bottom. Thankfully, the final film of this month does go up in quality with an interesting concept, being The Woman in the Yard, releasing March 28th. Now, before I continue, this film does have some very dark themes of suicide and depression, so if this is anything you are struggling with yourself, there is a suicide helpline on the screen and in the description. There's always people you can talk to, so don't be afraid. Speak to friends, speak to family, contact someone, because it will always get better. I promise you it is not the answer. But the film itself is directed by Jamaica Lessera and features Daniel Deadwyler playing the two characters. Now, I'm a big fan of the themes in this movie, as well as its metaphor of depression, suicide, guilt, and the consequences your actions have. I think the slow burn beginning and the way the film slowly unravels itself is told really well, and the menacing demeanor of the woman just sitting there in the yard is incredible. But I think once she moves and once we go inside of the house, it kind of loses itself. It just ends up becoming very performative and typical horror. But the ending is very powerful and had a lasting effect on me that I think this film is definitely worth watching. But quality-wise, I would give it a 3.5 out of 5 just because it does go very Hollywood. Sadly, because Daniel Deadwyler playing two characters is a twist, there is very little interaction. There's actually only one shot where she's in it twice because she becomes the woman in the yard. But before and after that point, the woman in the yard is played by a different actress. We'll get into the reason why I think that is, but because of that, the interaction is very minimal. So I'm going to give this a 1 out of 5 for interaction. And sadly, that's the only thing letting this film down, because the reason is on another level. Now, obviously, the woman in the yard is a metaphor for suicide, so the reason she becomes the woman in the yard is to show that it's her own action and her own choice. But I also love the fact that they decide to not have her as the two characters for the entire movie, because it shows two things. One, it makes it feel like it's not her decision and she's being forced into this, but also it shows how the children might see the woman in the yard and think, that's not my mum. And there's also the incredible scene at the end where her hand is physically being forced, which is why I'm giving this film a 5 out of 5 for reason. I don't think I could have added anything to it. Which means this film ended up with a 9.5 out of 15, hitting the #2 spot currently on this list. Now, moving into April, we have undeniably the best movie to release this year on April 18th, being Sinners. Obviously directed by Ryan Coogler, with Michael B. Jordan playing the Smokestack Twins. And where do I start with the praise of this movie? The use of the soundtrack, cinematography, filmmaking, narrative, everything about this film is on another level perfect. But let's start with the soundtrack, because Ludwig absolutely cooked, and if Last Time I See the Sun doesn't win the Oscar, I might actually revolt. Well, that comment didn't age very well, did it?
I lied to you from Sinners.
Everything about this movie is interesting, even down to the smallest task of them just getting more people for their juke joint. There's great tension building with this film, and honestly, it has everything, even romance. And this doesn't even begin to touch upon the quality of this film, with stuff like the I Lied to You scene and even the villains that I simply just don't have time to talk about. And if you aren't watching this film in IMAX, you are simply watching it wrong. It can only be watched in IMAX, and that's the only way I will watch it. I refuse to watch it otherwise. Just the cultural impact of this film alone is unrivaled. Whatever Ryan Coogler makes is going to be under everyone's radar. are. So are you surprised that I'm giving this a 5 out of 5 for movie quality? It's incredible. And somehow that rating doesn't even go down for the film interaction. Like the shot where we get introduced to the two characters, it's a moving shot. They pass the cigarette to each other and even light it in one shot. But is this effect really that hard? Well, I tried it myself for the intro, so let's see.
Now, trying to recreate this shot poses a few challenges, the first of which obviously being the weather. Any changes we get with the weather will drastically change the lighting, which will make it very difficult to blend the two shots together. Second of all, consistency. If my stunt double right here is out of place in any way, it will really not help the shot. And finally, probably the most important, timing. So we have a metronome, where it's actually just someone's phone going to be playing it. We also have this motorized system, which is going to be motorized, repeating the exact same shot over and over and over and over again so that we can get it perfect. Let's do this. Why are you so tall?
Now obviously one of the major differences between mine and the Sinners shot is production size and cost. First of all, the camera they used was a Panavision System 65 with custom lenses which can cost up to $10,000 per day. They also used a robot arm rig which for the high-end industry level ones would cost between $100,000 to $200,000. And if that wasn't enough, they even invented their own rig called the Halo rig to capture Michael B. Jordan's performance, which is made up of 10 to 12 Insta360 cameras all the way around his head. And of course the star of the movie, Michael B. Jordan, got paid $4 million for this role, and all of this cost so far doesn't even cover the cast, the crew, the props, or any of the other equipment. And let's be realistic here, I didn't have that kind of budget, so all the props were stuff I already owned, so basically cost nothing. Let's not inform the HMRC about the unpaid labour my cast and crew went through, and the only major cost was for the rig, which was about £200 anyway. So let's be honest here, money definitely buys quality, but I don't think I did too bad for the nearly $5 million I definitely saved. But there's even more interaction, like the two hugging next to the car, and throwing the knife to each other. But don't get me started on the final fight of this film, because honestly it might be seamless. And I can't talk about the interaction without talking about how amazing Michael B. Jordan's performance is with himself. So yeah, obviously no surprises, this film has another 5 out of 5 for interaction. Now the reason, while it is generic and basically the same reason as The Monkey, it is done infinitely better.
You twins? Nah, we cousins.
It's way more subtle and you actually understand these characters are different, but because of their lives and through subtle things like the way they dress and the way they stand. Therefore, I'm giving this film a 4 out of 5 for reason, which is 14 out of 15. I don't think anything can beat that. This film always has me in tears. It is just incredible. Now, May started off pretty well, with 2 movies releasing the exact same day. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is our first superhero movie of the list, being Marvel's Thunderbolts. Directed by Drake Schreier, we have both Florence Pugh and Lewis Pullman playing 2 characters. Now, let's be real, this is certainly a step up to most of the recent Marvel stuff we've got. However, I do really like the grounded approach, and I hope Marvel go in this direction moving forwards. And there's some really compelling and well choreographed fight sequences that are slightly ruined by humor. And let's not talk about how dirty they did Taskmaster. And yes, I really love Void in this movie, but I will be honest, the first half does drag slightly. So I'm going to give the movie a 3.5 out of 5 for its movie quality. Now, similar to The Woman in the Yard, neither of these 2 characters really interact that much until the end of the movie. Now, Yelena, or Florence Pugh, has a really cool fight sequence with herself in that bathroom, but this scene's very short with a lot of obstructions to her face. They just used a body double and deepfake. Similarly, Bob fighting himself is even more obscured because he's fighting a shadow version of himself. I would be very heavily convinced this is probably a body double because it is easily the easiest way to do that. Therefore, because of the slight simplicity, I'm going to give this an interaction rating of 2 out of 5. And finally, I think it's a really nice reason having Florence Pugh fight a younger, less developed version of herself. It's like a physical representation of her fighting her past urges. Similarly, with Bob fighting the Void, you can see the major differences between the 2 characters and how he doesn't want to be like that. However, the reason doesn't really span much past these 2 ideas, so I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5 rating, giving this film an 8 out of 15 overall rating, which is pretty good. And the other film to release the exact same day is Another Simple Favor, directed by Paul Feig. Now, first of all, I want to mention I had to do context viewing for this one because it's a sequel to A Simple Favor. I will let it off though because the first one was actually quite good. Can the same be said about the second? But in both movies, Blake Lively plays multiple characters. Now, obviously, like most movies of this caliber, in the second one, they went way bigger than the first. The issue with this film is nothing really happens for most of it. It also suffers being very predictable, and I do fear the whole purpose of this film just felt like an afterthought, with a weird gay Romeo and Juliet twist, which wouldn't be so bad if it didn't feel like Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively actually had more romantic chemistry.
All right, we get it. This isn't how you talk to somebody you're in love with.
And the film ends with one of the most pathetic fights over a gun I have ever seen. Therefore, it gets 2.5 out of 5 for its movie quality. Now, the interaction doesn't get much better, with their first interaction being in the last 20 minutes of this movie. There's a pretty decent interaction shot with the both of them laying together in a bed. The only issue is it's very still. So again, a simple body double and deepfake. However, the interaction gets quite good when they actually physically interact by kissing. Yes, you heard that right, but this does kind of save the interaction because she doesn't hold back. Therefore, I would give this an interaction of 3 out of 5. But I'm deducting a point because Blake Lively makes out of herself way too passionately that it kind of makes me uncomfortable. And finally, the reason for this second Blake Lively is actually just set up in the previous movie with them having a triplet.
I want to know about your twin faith.
I'm not a twin.
I know that you are.
We were triplets.
And because she's completely shadowed from the world, she becomes very psychotic, and I didn't really lean upon this at all. She kind of just exists as a twist. So because of that, I'm also going to give this 2 out of 5 rating, giving this film a 6.5 overall score, which puts this film pretty low on my current ranking list. Now, if I had a nickel for every time a superhero movie released in 2025 where one actor plays 2 characters, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened twice, right? With the second one being Superman, which released July 11th. Now, the film obviously features David Corenswet as Superman, playing multiple characters and directed by James Gunn, and he's created the perfect symbol of hope we've needed from Superman for a long while. This movie inspires me to do great things and be a better person, and that is exactly the kind of character that Superman is, wanting to save all life no matter how insignificant it may seem. And I love we get to see both sides of this character's life with the Justice Gang and the Daily Planet, and of course I have to mention the fact that Mr. Terrific shines in this movie as probably one of the best characters. I am so excited for the future of the DC Universe with James Gunn in control, and I can't wait for Supergirl releasing this year. And for that reason, I'm giving this movie a 4.5 out of 5. I cannot pick anything out that I didn't enjoy. Now, in terms of interaction, like most of these movies, there's not much interaction until the very end. But when he does interact with himself, he's physically beating himself up, switching between the 2 faces and showing both perspectives. Now, this interaction is very fast and hard to focus on the 2 faces, so there is a high chance they probably did use a body double. Therefore, it gets an interaction rating of 3 out of 5. But finally, the reason is pretty basic. Similar to Mickey 17, he is a clone, but I think the differences between him being a clone in this and Mickey 17 are way better, because obviously Lex hasn't perfected the cloning mechanism, so it's not a perfect clone, but him just being a clone is very basic, so it gets a rating of 2 out of 5, which means overall it gets 9.5 out of 15, putting it in the top 3 of this list. Now, the next film was probably the hardest to access because it doesn't release in the UK until February next year, but Twinless released in America on September 5th. Now, the film is directed by James Sweeney, who actually co-stars alongside Dylan O'Brien, who plays the 2 different characters. And I'm telling you, if you live in the UK, I promise you, when it releases in February, it's definitely worth watching in cinemas. I love the subversion after the first 10 minutes of this film, where we first meet Dennis, who seemed to have lost his twin, but later we find out that he was actually dating Roman's brother. I think this non-linear structure really helps the film and makes that opening very strong. The film also has effects that I typically don't like in movies, like this split screen effect, but the reason behind that is so incredible. I also love the way it splits out of and splits into that split screen effect. It's done so well. And I love seeing how accidentally manipulative Dennis actually is in all situations. This is an incredibly written movie and has such a wholesome ending. I don't really want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it because it's an independent film that's definitely worth watching. So I'm going to give this movie a 4.5 out of 5 movie rating. In terms of interaction, there actually is no interaction because we only see Rocky in one scene, which is a flashback which is completely irrelevant to Roman. However, I actually love the decision to not have them interact. Because we find out the 2 brothers had a bit of a complicated relationship, we can really understand the differences between them and why they fell out through that. Therefore, while this film probably should get a 0 out of 5 for interaction, I'm going to give it a 1 just because I really love the choice of not having them interact. And I really love the idea of this film that losing a twin is like losing part of yourself. This is a connection with another person that people like me who don't have a twin can't understand. Additionally, because the twins look exactly the same, it makes their personalities that much different because they're both very oppositional. And we also learned that Rocky was probably very similar to Dennis, whereas Roman is very different. Therefore, for reason, I'm going to give this movie a 3 out of 5 rating, which means overall it gets 8.5 out of 15, putting it pretty high on this list. And finally, we're ending this list in November with our last 3 movies. The first of which being Frankenstein, which released on Netflix on the 7th of November, but had a limited cinema release from the 17th of October. And it's directed by Guillermo del Toro, having Mia Goth play 2 different characters. The film itself has a gorgeous stylistic choice, and I absolutely love the use of color. Guillermo del Toro easily shines in his monster movies and these gothic retellings, and I love the narrative choice of starting it from Victor's perspective and ending it with the creature's perspective. There's also a really interesting dynamic between the 3 main characters, obviously being Mia Goth, Jacob Elordi, and Oscar Isaac. And visually, this film is gorgeous with some amazing aspects of gore, so I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 rating for its quality. But in terms of interaction, Mia Goth doesn't even interact with herself, so I wouldn't be surprised if you completely overlooked she was in the film twice. And it's not even really a smart reason like in Twinless, it's just because the 2 characters would have never known each other, so it doesn't make sense them actually interacting. So this would get a 0 out of 5 for interaction. And sadly, that is the only thing that lets this film down, because I love the reason behind Mia Goth playing these 2 characters. Because at first she's playing Victor's mother, who dies. So then later, when Mia Goth is resurrected playing a completely different character, it's like she's returned as the bride of Frankenstein. It's also amazing symbolism because Mia Goth's character Elizabeth is basically just the representation of life. She brings life in Victor's life and also the creatures. So because of the amazing reasoning behind that, I give the film a 4 out of 5, which means overall it gets 8 out of 15, and if they interacted, it would have got way higher. Now, a film that released on the exact same day is Predator Badlands, directed by Dan Trachtenberg, the same guy who also directed Prey, so he seems to have a good grip on what this universe needs. This film has some great world building, and I love how Deck eventually uses his surroundings to his advantage. There's some really well designed creatures on this planet and some interesting twists, and it's honestly just a captivating story of showing how working together actually gives you the advantage. So in terms of quality, I'm giving this film a 4 out of 5, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the Predator franchise has to come in the future. But the actress who plays 2 characters in this movie is Elle Fanning. I wish I could say there was a good decision behind that, but sadly they don't really interact that often. Similar to the monkey, basically their only interaction is a shot reverse shot. However, I'm going to give the film a bonus point because Elle Fanning's not the only actress who plays multiple characters in this film, because Cameron Brown also does. Now usually we do see him in either very dark locations or very crowded locations from very far away, but he plays all of the male AI robots in this movie that get into a lot of fight sequences. So therefore, I'm going to give this movie a 2 out of 5 for interaction, 1 point for each of the different actors. But sadly, the reason doesn't save this film because obviously they're AI interfaces, so they're just designed to look the same. And it's not even like their differences are from their experiences like a lot of the other films in this list. They were specifically programmed to be different, because one of them is a scavenger and the other one's a researcher, so they have completely different skill sets.
We were created to work in tandem. Me cooped up in the lab, Tessa out in the field.
So again, this is going to get 2.5. Now, slight spoilers, but I actually give this film an 8 out of 15 rating. And well, I don't know if you've been doing the maths, but 4 plus 2 plus 2.5 does not add up to 8. So let's just fix this by removing that 0.5 and placing this between Frankenstein and Thunderbolts. And now for the final film on this list, as I said previously, we're going to be ending where we started with another Osgood Perkins movie being The Keeper, his 2nd of the year. Now from my knowledge, this is the last movie to release this year where one actor plays 2 characters, who is Tatiana Maslany. I do have to say, Osgood Perkins is really good at creating tension through his cinematography and slow moving scenes, but he achieves this effect way better in Longlegs because not really anything actually happens in this film. It's a lot of Tatiana's character just moving around the house and weird things happening with no real fulfillment upon this. But the film itself isn't scary, it's just uncomfortable and weird and hard to watch. And only being an hour and a half, the film feels way longer, so I'm going to give the film a quality score of 3 out of 5. Now, Tatiana's character serves the purpose of a plot twist set 200 years apart, so I think you can guess the 2 never interact once. There's no reason for me to expand upon that. I'm going to give this a 0 out of 5 for interaction. But in terms of having 2 characters, the film's not that bad because this is about her life's purpose. And the only reason she survived this house is because the children saw her as their mother. I just do feel like this is an idea that could have been developed further because it's mainly just touched upon and not really expanded that much. And I think that's the issue with this film. It's an idea I really liked, but for most of it, I didn't really know what was happening. Therefore, for the reason it's going to get the same quality score of a 3 out of 5, giving this a total score of 6 out of 15, putting it right near the bottom.
Now you've heard about all the amazing nominees, it's time to give out the award. So the winner for best performance by one actor playing multiple characters in the same movie is... it's blank. That can only mean one thing. I'm the Dragon Warrior!
And with that, we've hit our final film of the year, and here is the full ranking of every movie that has released this year where one actor plays two characters. I had a lot of fun watching all these movies, and some of them are way better than others. But in the end, only one movie managed to be better than Sonic 3. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I really hope you agreed with at least most of my ranking. However, with the new year just around the corner, I plan to make a lot more content next year. Anyway, thank you, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.